Were these British cinema legends actually fools? Or have we been believing the wrong story for decades? One actor's drinking destroyed a brilliant career. Another reportedly turned down the role of a lifetime. And stars like David Niven, Peter O'Toole, Richard Burton, Oliver Reed, and Nigel Bruce all earned reputations that still spark debate today. But here's the twist: not every Hollywood legend on this list deserves the label they were given. Some truly sabotaged themselves, while others became victims of gossip, myth, or being simply too good at one unforgettable role. By the end of this countdown, you'll see which stories are backed by real evidence and which ones completely fall apart. Before we begin, subscribe to Vintage Uncovered for more untold stories from Britain's greatest film icons. Proven fools where the evidence isn't theoretical. Robert Newton. Robert Newton is the reason every pirate you've ever heard growls "RR." His performance as Long John Silver in Treasure Island didn't just define a character. It invented an entire accent that cartoons and costume parties still copy today. That legacy is real and permanent. So is the reason his career burned out absolutely. Newton's heavy drinking wasn't a rumor whispered by rivals. It was a documented, career-defining problem that producers openly factored into every hiring decision. This isn't speculation. This is business calculation. Studios wanted his lightning. They knew the storm came with it. Directors described shoots literally built around whether he'd arrive in shape to work. They scheduled around his hangovers. They rewritten scenes depending on whether Newton showed up capable of remembering them. By his early 50s, the toll was undeniable, and he died at 50 of heart failure. Here's the tragedy in plain terms: the talent was enormous. The influence outlived him, but the discipline never showed up. Newton could have become one of Britain's greatest character legends, with decades of range ahead of him. Instead, the industry slowly stopped gambling on a brilliant actor who couldn't be relied upon to finish the scene. Greatness without steering isn't a career. It's a shipwreck with an audience. Oliver Reed. Oliver Reed had the face, the presence, and the raw magnetism to be one of the most dependable leading men of his era. Dependable is the one word nobody ever used about him. His drinking and his chaos weren't tabloid inventions. They were extensively documented on film sets and famously on live television, where his appearances became actual legends for all the wrong reasons. Producers genuinely never knew which Oliver Reed would show up: the fearless one who lit up the screen, or the one who turned a production into a survival exercise. What lands him firmly in the proven column is that the pattern is recorded, repeated, and absolutely undenied. There's footage, there's documentation, there are documented delays and rewrites. He seemed to dare into collapse, and yet, audiences adored him precisely because he felt untamed in an industry of carefully managed images. He worked steadily to the very end, dying during the filming of Gladiator following a drinking session which is almost poetic and entirely on brand. The talent was never the question. Reed proved again and again that the hardest opponent a gifted man ever faces is the one refusing to leave the bar. Peter O'Toole. Here's the irony of Peter O'Toole, one of the sharpest, most magnetic minds British cinema ever produced. Spent years generating stories that made friends genuinely fear for his life. His breakthrough turned him into an icon overnight. Off-screen, he became the ringleader of a hard-living generation who treated excess like a competitive sport. This isn't legend dressed up as fact. O'Toole documented plenty of it himself in interviews and in his own memoirs with the same wicked charm that made him a star. He wasn't silent about his own excesses. What separates him from mere gossip is a matter of medical record. In the mid-70s, illness tied to years of drinking became so severe that a large part of his digestive system had to be removed. Doctors genuinely weren't certain he'd survive. Most people treat that as a final warning. O'Toole treated it as another chapter, though he did finally stop drinking afterward. What keeps him in the proven column isn't a lack of intelligence. It's the astonishing documented gap between a man who clearly knew better and repeatedly chose otherwise anyway. Few legends have tested fate so openly and lived long enough to laugh about it. If you're finding this analysis interesting, the distinction between proven fact and repeated myth, subscribe. We're not just listing scandals. We're actually examining whether they're real. Hit that button and stay with us. George Sanders. George Sanders built the single most perfect screen personality in the business. the bored aristocrat. The elegant cynic who found everything faintly beneath him and made that look effortlessly stylish. He won an Oscar for it. He was quoted, imitated, adored, and unlike the other trapped stars on this list, Sanders didn't fight the cage. He decorated it, poured himself a drink, and locked the door from the inside. What moves his story from theory into documented fact is the ending. The boredom that made him magnetic on camera appears to have become tragically real off-screen. In 1972, Sanders took his own life. The note he left behind, famously describing himself as bored, turned his entire persona into an unbearable prophecy. That's not a rival's cruel rumor. It's on the record. In his own words, his life is the most serious warning on this list, and it deserves to be treated as one. Perform a version of yourself long enough without ever checking what's underneath, and you may not survive meeting the real thing. The mask was flawless. The man behind it, by his own account, had run out of reasons to stay. Richard Burton. Few voices in film history commanded a room like Richard Burton's. When he spoke, audiences leaned in. When he performed, he collected Academy Award nominations by the armful, 7 of them, in fact, without a single win. He reached heights most actors only dream of, and his career often looked like a war fought against his own choices. Burton's struggle with alcohol is not something biographers had to guess at. He acknowledged it himself openly, and it threaded through both his tumultuous personal life and his uneven filmography. This is documented self-awareness. The genuinely fascinating part is that he understood the problem with unusual clarity. Unlike stars who seem oblivious, Burton could describe exactly what was going wrong and then return to the same habits anyway. That contradiction is what makes him unforgettable rather than simply tragic. A man of real intellect and self-awareness, repeatedly making choices he knew were self-defeating. His 2 marriages to Elizabeth Taylor became their own global spectacle, sometimes overshadowing the work entirely. But that's a different conversation. Burton's story isn't one of failure. The talent never left him. It's the story of a brilliant man whose most stubborn adversary was, by his own admission, himself. Charles Laughton. Charles Laughton was, by near universal agreement, one of the greatest screen actors Britain ever produced. An Oscar winner who could make a monster funny and a fool terrifying in the same breath, he could also make an entire crew absolutely miserable. That part is thoroughly documented. Laughton's reputation for being difficult wasn't malice. It was bottomless insecurity that turned every scene into an argument with himself. Directors recorded the pattern in detail, endless debate over choices that looked perfect to everyone else. Entire production days lost chasing a moment only he could sense. One notorious film simply collapsed mid-production, and his struggles were part of the story. This is documented production history. Perfectionism can sharpen a performance. It can also exhaust the people trying to finish a picture on a budget. As the years passed, some major opportunities quietly went to safer hands, even when those hands were far less gifted, because working with Laughton demanded superhuman patience. This is the proven kind of self-sabotage, not a wild rumor, but a well-attested habit of complicating what didn't need complicating. Being the best actor in the room only helps if the room can actually get through the day with you. Anecdotal evidence, plentiful stories, thinner documentation. Now it gets blurrier. These reputations are real, but they're built more on anecdote, hearsay, and hindsight than on hard proof, so take them with a pinch of salt. Rex Harrison. For decades, Rex Harrison was the very picture of sophistication. Elegant, effortless, the Oscar-winning Henry Higgins himself. Behind that polish sat a very different reputation. Co-stars and colleagues described a man who could be dazzling one moment and absolutely impossible the next, holding everyone to exacting standards whilst showing little patience when they weren't met. The stories are plentiful and colorful. The tension, the confrontations, the apparent surprise when people bristled at being snapped at. But here's the problem. Plentiful and colorful is exactly the problem for a fact-checker. Much of it comes down to memoir, gossip, and second-hand retelling sharpened over the years into legend. What's fair to say is that the difficult genius label followed him everywhere, and as tastes changed and newer faces arrived, patience for that temperament thinned considerably. Whether he genuinely sabotaged himself or simply became a convenient story once the industry cooled on him is harder to prove than to assert. Harrison had every advantage an actor could want. The rumor is that pride kept getting in the way. The evidence is mostly other people remembering things decades later. Stuart Granger. Stuart Granger looked born for swashbucklers, handsome, athletic, perfectly cast as the dashing hero in adventure after adventure. Success came early, and often so, the stories go, did a reputation for arrogance. Directors reportedly admired the talent whilst wrestling with the attitude, describing a man convinced he knew better than everyone around him. A man whose confidence curdled into stubbornness and strained important relationships. It's a tidy narrative, and there's some smoke behind it. Granger himself was famously scornful of many of his own films in later interviews, which did little to soften the prickly image. But here's the honest caveat. Most of the difficult reputation lives in anecdote and impression, not documented incident. Hollywood tolerates big egos whilst the money flows and rewrites the story the moment it doesn't, which means a cooling career can generate impossible to work with tales after the fact. What's clear is that opportunities grew harder to secure and the industry's patience wore thin. Whether that was self-inflicted arrogance or ordinary career gravity dressed up as a morality tale is genuinely difficult to settle. The talent was never in dispute. The rest is mostly reputation, and reputation is the easiest thing to fabricate retrospectively. Not stupidity, just perfect at one thing, and finally, the stars people love to call foolish, where if you actually look for evidence, there's almost none. These are typecast stories and comic masks mistaken for the real person. Nigel Bruce. Start with the man himself, because it matters. Nigel Bruce fought in the First World War and was seriously wounded. A genuine veteran who rebuilt an entire life through theatre. Then he became beloved as Dr. Watson, reimagined as gentle, bumbling, endearingly confused beside Basil Rathbone's razor-sharp Holmes. Audiences adored him for it. And that is precisely how a decorated soldier ended up on lists like this one. Remembered as a lovable fool. But notice the sleight of hand. Bruce didn't do anything foolish. He played a character brilliantly, so brilliantly that the public mistook the performance for the person, and casting directors never let him escape it. There is no evidence whatsoever that Nigel Bruce was dumb. The record shows the opposite. A wounded veteran with genuine range who got permanently boxed into one warm, funny archetype. The typecasting is true. The verdict attached to it is pure narrative. If anything, his story is a caution about us, the audience, how easily we confuse the mask an actor wears for the man underneath, and how unfair that confusion can be. Ronald Colman. Ronald Colman owned one of the most recognizable voices in cinema. Smooth, sophisticated. An Oscar winner and radio star who embodied the ideal gentleman for a generation. The knock against him is that he was too cautious. Whilst other stars pushed into darker, stranger, more complicated roles, Colman kept polishing the dignified leading man, and as tastes turned toward grittier realism, he supposedly let his own relevance fade rather than risk his image. It's a clean little morality tale. It's also almost entirely opinion. Choosing to do consistently well what you do best isn't stupidity. Plenty would call it professional wisdom. The claim that he should have reinvented himself is a critic's preference projected backward onto a successful, respected career that ran for decades. Where's the proof of a bad decision, as opposed to simply a style that eventually went out of fashion the way all styles do? There isn't any. Colman didn't blunder. He stayed himself whilst the world's taste moved on, which happens to nearly everyone if they last long enough. Calling that dumb says more about the storyteller than the star. C. Aubrey Smith. Here's a genuinely great fact. Before Hollywood C, Aubrey Smith was a real cricketer who captained England's national team. He carried that authority straight into the movies and became the definitive stiff upper-lip Englishman, the general, the colonel, the judge, the disapproving lord. He played that figure so convincingly it became his entire on-screen identity. And somehow, that lands him among the dumbest, which makes absolutely no sense when you examine it. Being repeatedly cast as the embodiment of dignity and command is not evidence of foolishness. It's evidence that he was extraordinarily good at a particular thing. There is no documented blunder here, no reckless decision, no proof of poor judgment. Just a distinguished athlete turned actor who got flattened into one reliable archetype by an industry that knew exactly what it wanted from him. The typecasting is real and a little sad. The dumb label is unearned narrative. A man who captained a national cricket side and then built decades-long Hollywood career on sheer commanding presence is, if anything, the opposite of what this list claims. Reputation, not evidence, put him here. Terry Thomas. Older fans know him instantly. The gap in the front teeth, the cigarette holder, the voice dripping with old money mischief. Terry Thomas perfected the cad, the charming upper-class rogue who's secretly a bit of a scoundrel, and he played selfish playboys and silly aristocrats so well that studios stopped imagining him as anything else. By the time comedy tastes moved on, he was still the cad, and the world had shifted around him. That's the story people tell, and it gets folded into dumbest. But look closely, and the foolishness evaporates. Terry Thomas didn't make idiotic choices. He built a specific, wildly popular comic persona and rode it to fame on both sides of the Atlantic. Being typecast because you're excellent at one beloved thing is a career pattern, not a character flaw. And there's no evidence he lacked sense off-screen. The deeper actor underneath simply never got a door opened for him. What we have is a brilliant comedian trapped by his own trademark, which is a story about the industry's imagination, not his intelligence. The persona was the cad, the man was a craftsman. Margaret Rutherford. Margaret Rutherford was one of the most singular performers Britain ever produced. A booming laugh, a face full of character, and later an Academy Award. But to the public, she became one thing above all: Agatha Christie's Miss Marple, the clever old detective outsmarting criminals twice her size. She played the part so completely that casting directors could barely picture her as anyone else, and offers narrowed. That's the trap, and it's why she turns up on lists like this. Yet calling any of it foolish is nonsense. Rutherford was a trained, serious actress who won major awards for other work. The woman was demonstrably brilliant, not dumb in any sense the word actually means. Becoming so identified with a beloved character that the public won't let you leave it is something that happens to gifted performers, not foolish ones. There's no misjudgment on record here, no reckless move. Nothing but the ordinary tragedy of being too memorable in one role. The evidence for her stupidity is precisely zero. What we're really watching is talent so distinctive it became a cage, and that says absolutely nothing bad about her at all. Norman Wisdom. Norman Wisdom built an entire career on looking clueless. On screen, he tripped over everything, misunderstood the simplest instruction, and turned pure confusion into comedy gold. The lovable fool who somehow survived every disaster. He was so convincing that stories spread of him being just as scattered off screen, which is exactly how a man ends up on a list of Britain's dumbest, and it's the clearest example on here of a total misread. Playing a fool that well is not foolishness. It's an extraordinarily difficult skill, the kind only a sharp, disciplined performer can pull off take after take after take. Wisdom rose from real poverty to international stardom entirely on his own timing and craft. That's not the resume of a simpleton. Confusing the character he perfected with the man who engineered it is the whole mistake. And there is no genuine evidence he was anything but shrewd. If anything, he was smart enough to know that appearing hopelessly lost on purpose was worth a fortune. The clumsiness was choreography. The idiot was a role. And the person building it knew exactly what he was doing. David Niven. And now, the story we teased at the start. David Niven was the definition of British charm in Hollywood. Witty, elegant, an Oscar winner who later wrote best-selling memoirs still enjoyed today. He was also a genuine war hero, a decorated soldier who served with distinction in the Second World War. So why does he headline this countdown? Because of one irresistible legend. The story goes like this. Niven was offered a major role in an ambitious war epic. He turned it down, unsure it would succeed, and unwilling to endure a grueling remote shoot. And then he watched that film sweep the Academy Awards, whilst another actor became a legend overnight. It's a delicious what if. It's also crucially unverified. The scripts that repeat it hedge with reportedly, and the story goes. And nobody can firmly document the offer, the refusal, or the reasoning. This is pure legend. This is the perfect note to end on because it's the juiciest story here and the least proven. A witty, decorated war veteran gets branded foolish over an anecdote nobody can actually confirm. If that doesn't capture the whole problem with lists like this, nothing does. From documented chaos to pure typecasting to stories nobody can actually prove, these 18 legends remind us that dumb is often just a label. Here's what matters. The difference between a man who genuinely sabotaged himself and a man who simply got trapped by his own excellence is enormous. And most of what we remember is gossip, not evidence. Robert Newton's drinking destroyed his career that's documented. Oliver Reed couldn't leave the bar, we have footage. But Nigel Bruce wasn't dumb, he just played a fool brilliantly. Margaret Rutherford wasn't foolish, she was simply too good at one character. And David Niven's great regret might not even be real. The legends matter. But so does knowing which ones are actually proven. Which entry surprised you most? And who did we get genuinely wrong? Drop it in the comments, because this channel is built on the conversation, not just the scandal. Subscribe, because next week we're going deeper into the stories nobody actually verified, the myths that became truth because nobody bothered to check. Thanks for staying till the end.